it. But I think to myself, if you just eliminated seed oils, if you just eliminated processed food, if you just eliminated soda from your diet, you would feel so much better.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our videos. If you'd like to support us some more, you can explore our homemade natural skincare products at purelytallow.com. Thank you so much for supporting my small business. Hey everybody, welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena, and today my guest is Josie. You probably know her as the Ex-Plant Eater on Instagram. And Josie and I have been friends for a while, talking back and forth, and I'm excited to share her story because right now the plant-based movement is even stronger than ever. And that's the background Josie comes from. So we're going to talk about that today and get her story. Josie, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. So yes, I was vegan for 14 years. I started with veganism around, I would say when I was 13. I initially did have an eating disorder, around that time, I would say like when I was about 12. And I did recover from that, but coming out of that eating disorder, I found veganism, I would say a few months later. I was at a concert and I believe that they were showing the documentary Earthlings at like a merch booth.
Yeah.
And I went home and I remember I watched the whole thing. I was sold right away. I thought it was healthier. I thought it was the most ethical way to eat. And I think I was very impressionable because one, I was super young. I was still a child. And two, I was coming out of this really depressed, like horrible episode in my life. So again, I was on all fronts, like very impressionable at the time and very vulnerable. So I decided veganism was going to be my thing. I became vegan overnight after that. I luckily had parents that weren't necessarily happy about it, but they were supportive enough. I think like the fact that I did have an eating disorder kind of pushed my mom to be like, well, if you're going to eat vegan food, then I'll buy that for you at least. And so my mom helped me in the sense that she helped me, plan my diet around that. But I never really, I would say like pretty early on, I was going on YouTube and watching vegan influencers to find diet advice. I could, or from the way that it looked, it seemed like they were thriving and doing really well. They had the results that I supposedly wanted. So I stuck with it. And I get a lot of flack for this now, but looking back compared to how I feel now on a daily basis, I did not feel good. I would say, like, honestly, a single day while vegan. I told myself that I did. But for a while it was just really, really bad mental health issues. I had minor digestive issues. I never had vibrant skin as a vegan. It was things like that. But when I got to about year 10 of being vegan, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. It started out as minor symptoms. Initially, actually, I was diagnosed with diverticulitis, so it wasn't expressing itself as extremely as it got to be a few months later. But, the symptoms that I was starting to experience were severe pain after eating, blood in my stool. I would have diarrhea up to like 20 times a day. I was starting to experience malnutrition, not because I wasn't eating, but because I was being prevented from eating like as much as I should have been. And also, my body was not absorbing nutrients. So I was experiencing symptoms of malnutrition. My heartbeat was irregular because, again, it was probably another symptom of malnutrition. And so I had one pretty bad episode of that in I want to say like May of 2017. I ended up hospitalized for a few days. That was when I was diagnosed with diverticulitis, and I I ended up just being prescribed antibiotics at the time. The doctors thought it was an infection. After that summer, I would say starting during, I was doing my bachelor's degree at the time. So starting my next semester at school, I started having like a ramp up again of those symptoms, but this time they were a lot worse. I remembered coming to the conclusion that I probably had colitis before I even went to the doctor for it because all of my symptoms were spot on. And so I got really sick and I was hospitalized that time for about a week. And I remember it was around November because it was around Thanksgiving. And I think I was in the hospital on Thanksgiving. And that time I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. And after that, I was supposed to start treatment for it. And I did take prednisone. I remember I did take like, a few months of prednisone, and that was what initially got me back to being able to function and made those symptoms go away. But after that, I never felt comfortable starting on, I think they probably wanted to start me on some kind of biologic, something to deal with the ulcerative colitis. And I wasn't comfortable with that because I genuinely felt like it had to be something in my environment that was causing
Hmm.
these things. I never had digestive issues growing up. I just really felt that in the core of my being. So I was stubborn. Like everybody around me probably thought I was being stubborn at the time and just didn't want to take this medication. But I did end up being able to manage my colitis by avoiding certain things as a vegan, but I still had digestive issues. So after that year 10, when I got diagnosed, I did stay vegan for about 4 years, but it was, again, another really stressful episode in my life. My fiance's family had a family member pass away unexpectedly. I was under a ton of stress. This was, a few years ago, about 3 years ago, I think, 2021. I started going into another really bad flare and everything was going on with COVID. And I didn't want to be hospitalized again. That was like the worst case scenario in my mind, especially because we just had this like really unexpected death in the family. And I was really desperate and I ended up I think I was reading a book and it did talk about how degenerative veganism is. And I had heard that before, but that was when it really clicked for me. And I decided, well, I've tried everything else. I've tried taking this, this, and this out of my diet, and I still have digestive issues. I've tried like diversifying my diet in different ways, all while staying vegan, and it just never worked. So again, came to the conclusion that maybe I'll just try eating animal products again and see if that might work because I've tried everything else. And so I started off with bone broth. That was the most benign thing I could think of. And right away, I started seeing improvements. I remember I started to see very minor improvements in my skin, but it was really in my digestion that I was looking to see improvements. And I did right away. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stuck with it. I wouldn't have had incentive. I was like terrified
Yeah.
that, like stopping being vegan at the time was the worst case scenario for me.
Yeah.
So it did work though, and I saw enough improvements in my digestion that, after a few weeks, I incorporated eggs and fish again. And again, I did it in steps over about a 6-month period of
Mhm.
adding new things in. And each time I did, especially up when I reincorporated beef and like beef fat into my diet, I saw the most profound improvements
Amazing.
then. So everything along the way proved to me that regardless of what anyone wants to say, this is clearly the way I should be eating. Otherwise, I wouldn't be seeing these health improvements. So that's how I went from being vegan to doing the carnivore diet.
And I think so many people end up in the same situation you were in, maybe not as drastic, maybe not as bad, but so many people end up being unhealthy doing a plant-based diet and they think they're just unhealthy and they're waiting for the plant-based diet to kick in and fix what's wrong, right? So is that kind of how you felt, like just like veganism hadn't caught on yet with your body, or did you just keep telling yourself this will get better and it's not my diet?
It was totally just denial, honestly, in retrospect. I would see these influencers, and that's also something I take responsibility for. Obviously, I shouldn't have been taking all my dietary advice from influencers on YouTube, but it was like veganism, I want to say back then, because it was like 5+ years ago. It was huge on
Yeah.
YouTube. I don't think it's as big now, but I know what you mean still about the plant-based movement only becoming more pervasive.
Yeah.
But it was huge. So I saw these influencers that were getting the results I wanted. And, I did believe it was the most ethical. I wanted to be a vet as a little kid. So I've always loved animals. And that was really what sold me. And I think I was just always telling myself that it was the most ethical. It was the healthiest. Like it
Mhm.
does like make my mental
Yeah.
health better and all of that stuff. And I wasn't seeing the evidence in my actual life. And yeah, I guess in a way I was waiting for it to work. And then the opposite happened.
Yeah. And before I started carnivore, if anybody had asked me, I totally would have said plant-based is the best diet. And I would blame myself. Like, I just can't stick to it. Because I've tried, I had tried plant-based, I had tried vegan, I had tried many different things over the years. And I think up until the day I started carnivore and started doing research, I think that I would have still said, I mean, I think if you ask anybody out on the street right now, most of the time people are going to say that a plant-based diet is probably the best diet. And so often after however long, it does start to make people sick, and you have to supplement so much to keep yourself healthy in that way of eating. So were you doing that? Were you taking supplements, and like were you really veganing hard? Were you like measuring everything to make sure you weren't deficient in things? Because there are people that when I say I just didn't feel as good on plant-based, people say, well, you probably weren't doing it right. Like, what do you think? Do you think that you were doing it right? Do you think that you were trying everything to stick with that and stay healthy?
I was taking vitamin B12 pretty consistently. I never have been a person that is like organized enough to take a supplement every single day, but more often than not, I was taking vitamin B12. There weren't a lot of other things I would supplement, but I would get foods that were fortified with certain nutrients that did have those. I guess you could say, yeah, that they were synthetic supplements, but they did have those vitamins that I might have been missing. Otherwise, though, I I did vary my diet in the sense that I started off eating, I would say, like, the standard American diet just with vegan supplements, which is, like, even worse than the actual standard American diet now, in my opinion, because it lacks the actual nutrients that are at least in animal products, but
Right.
I started out doing it that way. I did try I did try the raw food diet. I did try like the fruitarian diet because I was watching Freely the Banana Girl at the time. And then after that, I remember trying Raw Till 4. That was another thing that Freely promoted. If your viewers aren't familiar, she was a big like vegan influencer. I think she still is. I did I was like in for a few years I did do that and that didn't work for me. I remember having the worst cravings and being the most at odds with like having really low self-esteem at the time because of my weight, because of how bloated I was. This was
Mhm.
still when I was in my early teens, early to like late teens. Then as time moved on, people love to give me flack for this, because I would eat certain processed foods as a vegan, even though my diet in retrospect was like I thought it was pretty balanced. Like I would still eat plenty of fruit, vegetables. I would eat grains. Like I would eat a lot of unprocessed foods, but I would also eat certain meat substitutes and whatnot. I honestly think in retrospect, what kept me vegan for the last few years because they were the only thing that kept my cravings away enough to stick to it and to be like somewhat satisfied, even though I wasn't true to like the fullest extent that I could be, but they were really the only thing that caused my cravings to go away. So that was in the end for the last few years what I did find worked the best for me. Uh I was, I was supplementing on and off. Yeah. Ultimately, like the way that I eat now, I don't have to supplement anything. So it's much more simple. So obviously, like I'd rather do this.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. While you were so sick though, and in and out of the hospital, were the doctors advising you to eat more vegetables? Because I know a lot of people that have diverticulitis, and they say that the doctor's advice, and colitis too, like the doctor's advice is to eat more plant-based, and they're telling them that's the problem, is that they're basically not eating enough vegetables, which in my opinion and from what I've seen from people just makes it worse.
Yeah. That advice is so counterintuitive to me now. If a doctor said that to me, I would not listen, obviously. Back then, so the doctors that I was like working with when I was in my really bad episodes of having diverticulitis and then colitis, they did say that because I was vegan, I was kind of a step up in dealing with it because red meat and dairy cause ulcerative colitis. So they did mislead me at the time. I know that they didn't do it intentionally, but at the time I felt vindicated because I was like, well, I'm a step ahead in dealing with this because I'm already vegan. But then, consistently, the evidence in my life, like I kept getting sicker. So if I was, not eating these things that caused inflammation, then why did I keep getting sicker? So I feel bad for people that genuinely take that advice to heart because they probably only get sicker and then they have to become more dependent on medications.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about, you were getting your advice from like YouTube and stuff like that. So I think that's hard because here we are kind of giving people advice. But like for me, I think what you have to do is you have to take it to heart. You have to do some research, and then I don't think there's any harm in trying it. Like when you tried that, like at some point you believed in it so much. But I think like at some point you have to say, okay, this isn't working for me, which is eventually what you did. And so I think that's the advice for people watching this maybe is if you hear about carnivore and you think that it sounds you think it sounds ridiculous and you think, all these people must be making up their stories, it's certainly not going to hurt you to try it for 3 weeks or a month and see how you feel. I think that can be the true indicator. And there are people all over the internet saying, I did this for 30, 60, 90 days. I've been doing this for a year. And these are the things that have gone away for me. So I think what you said is true, but I think there is like, I wouldn't be doing it had I not found people on the internet, had I not found Kelly Hogan and the Joe Rogan podcast, with Sean Baker. And had I not found those things, I don't think I would be doing it, And so I think we can still
Yeah.
help people get there and just make sure they understand that, find other people to listen to too, take the advice and try it. And while you're trying it, do your research. And then probably what's going to happen is your body is going to tell you whether or not this is good in the first few weeks or month. And you're certainly not going to do any damage by trying it, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even with this way of eating, I remember I did find Kelly Hogan's story early on, and I did find Steak and Butter Gal,
Yeah.
and that was what gave me I was seeing the evidence in my own life of feeling better consistently, but I really needed that push. I also found Dr. Ken Berry. He was
Mhm.
probably the first doctor that I found on YouTube who talked about it. And that again gave me confidence. And okay, there's a doctor that is saying that this is a good way of eating. So
Yeah.
that definitely played a role this time as well. To be completely honest about it.
So what did your friends and family think when you made this, kind of drastic switch? Did you have like backlash? Do you still have backlash from family members being like, because like for me, I feel like my family is burned out. So when they hear me talking about carnivore, they think, oh yeah, this is just another thing she's doing. She used to juice all the time. She was plant-based for a while. She was vegan for a while. Like I feel like they don't hear me and they think that it's just one more ridiculous thing that I'm trying, a phase that I'm going through, and I'll grow out of it again. So did your family kind of feel like that? Like, what are you doing?
It's that I will say is kind of frustrating. I live with my fiance and we eat the same way. He did find that he needs to eat rice because he was losing too much weight doing just the carnivore diet, but he experienced a lot of the same health benefits that I did right away, like right along with me. So he was sold. And ironically, the member of the family who passed away ate in a very similar way to the way we eat now, just by process of elimination. And he was super fit. So in a way, it's just kind of like an ironic thing. But
Yeah.
we both got sold on it right away, and we eat most of our meals together, so we don't really have to deal with it too much. But uh, the thing was with me is I clearly looked unhealthy when I stopped being vegan, and everybody in my life could see when I stopped being vegan my that I look a lot healthier. So I think it was kind of like a conundrum. Like they had to acknowledge like you look a lot healthier, but on the other hand, I've had some flack, but like we luckily haven't had any really awkward interactions with family members, but I've had my parents tell me like, it's really not healthy to eat all the cholesterol you're eating and whatnot. And I just let it go at the end of the day. But, luckily I know the extreme side of that, like because I get hate on the internet from vegans every day. I haven't had anything crazy like that happen with people, but I did actually have a friend too though that what did she call me? She called me like a fascist or something because of the way I eat now. So that was a little crazy. Obviously, I shut her out of my life quickly
Yeah.
after that.
Mhm.
But that happened just on the internet. Otherwise, in person, we don't really deal with too much flack. But I know that there are family members that are kind of like, what are you doing now? And it is frustrating too to when I do come back in contact with friends I haven't seen in a while to I just know that that's what they're thinking, like, "Well, you were vegan, so I'm just gonna take this with a grain of salt, like, you're
Yeah.
just clearly on to the next thing," but, at the end of the day, it's like, I feel so much better, I don't have to deal with ulcerative colitis anymore, so I'm just gonna keep doing my thing, but I hear you because that can be frustrating, and I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think we just have to be a good example. Like for me, there are a lot of people in my life that I feel like would benefit from eating like this. And I don't believe everybody needs to be a carnivore. I feel like there's probably an in between there for most people after they have eliminated everything and they can add some things back in that don't bother them. What do you think about that? Do you think that there's kind of a happy medium?
100%. Yeah, I mean, there are so many people that I know, and I genuinely feel sympathy because I see them going through health issues, like people my age that I know. And I don't really even bring up the way that I eat because I know that they're not going to be open to it. But I think to myself, if you just eliminated seed oils, if you just
Yeah.
eliminated processed food, if you just
Yeah.
eliminated soda from your diet, you would feel so much better. And sometimes I will give more general advice like that, but I'm just not going to say you should do the carnivore diet because I know they'll look at me like I have three heads.
Yeah.
So, but 100%, yeah, I think most people would benefit from just taking really processed food out of their diet, from taking seed oils out. But I feel like that's what starts you on it's like, like the gateway drug. Like once you do that, you see how much better you feel and you're incentivized to keep going. Like that was how it was for me. So
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So, what does a typical day of eating look like for you now? Are you still a really strict carnivore? What does that look like?
I have found, so I had a few things that I would have outside of like what would be considered carnivore, but they really ended up just being coffee and lemon or lime juice.
Okay.
I thought that I needed that for electrolytes and vitamin C, but most recently, the only thing that is a plant that I still have in my diet is coffee. Otherwise, I don't even eat seasoned meats because I find that my digestion is like night and day now compared to the way it was when I was vegan. But I will find that I have slight digestive upset if I have seasonings. With lemon juice most recently, I was finding that I would have it and then I'd be like backed up for a few days. So I didn't necessarily think that that was why. And then I took it out completely for a few weeks and now my digestion's been completely back to normal. So I found consistently that every plant product besides coffee, and who knows, coffee will probably end up, I'll probably end up having to take it out eventually too. But everything else doesn't agree with me. So right now, yeah, I eat mostly ruminant meat. Whenever people ask me what I do eat, it's like so redundant to describe because it's
Yeah.
like the same thing all the time. But yeah, it's mostly ruminant meat. I did subscribe to Butcher Box and that has been great because I don't even have to think really about I would say like half of the meat that I buy for the month. But we do mostly get ruminant meat. Like ground beef. We eat a lot of steak. Today I had salmon this morning. I did also find that eggs don't agree with me very well. So I know that that's like a staple with the carnivore diet, and I love eggs, but I did start to find that I would get constipated if I had eggs. So I took them out for the time being. I don't think I'm never going to eat an egg again, but I don't eat them very much. So I do mostly rely on red meat, and certain types of fish, mostly salmon. We also eat bass, like I guess like heartier types of fish.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. I know for a lot of people, it keeps them from getting bored if they vary the things. So it sounds like even though there are certain things you can't have, that you're kind of still doing that. So I wanted to ask you if you have any book recommendations for people who, are there any like really good health books that you've read that might be good for other people?
To be honest, I haven't yet. I have bought a few books that I just haven't read yet, but I know one that I see all the time that I do want to read as soon as possible is I believe it's called The Great Plant-Based Myth by Jane Buxton.
The
I
Great
see,
Plant-Based Con.
yes, The
Yeah,
Great
that's a good
Plant-Based
one.
Con. I do want to read that. And then I believe another one that again I do have, I just have to read it. It's called The Vegetarian Myth. And I believe that that was written by a woman who also had a very long period of being vegan or vegetarian and then switched and I believe she wrote a book about like how agriculture can be helpful for the environment and whatnot. So I do want to read that. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Okay. And then you want to take a minute and talk about your book?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you for including that.
Uh huh.
So I am the author of a science fiction novel. It's a book series, but I'm still working on the second book right now. The first book is called Finding a Nevera, and I always say that it's like Stranger Things meets a Cinderella story. It's kind
Okay.
of like a coming of age story for the main character, Lucy Devine. I'm so bad at giving like a synopsis, but I'll say it's kind of like Stranger Things meets a Cinderella story for anybody that is interested in it. And I hope that the second book is done in the next year. It should be. So that'll be up and coming soon.
That's awesome. And do you have one piece of advice for somebody who maybe is going through what you went through and hasn't quite made the leap yet to quit doing a plant-based diet?
A piece of advice that I did hear very early on when I stopped being vegan, it was actually on another podcast, was uh and this person was quoting somebody else, so I don't know who said this originally, but let the open mind that led you to veganism be the open mind that gets you out of it. And that really resonated with me because I always found, or I always thought of myself as a very open-minded person. And I thought that that was, what made me open to trying veganism. And in the end, it really was my open-mindedness that, led to me deciding to reincorporate animal products in my diet. And some people might find it to be silly to say it like this, but really having the courage to add them back into my diet, because at the time I thought that they were like the boogeyman. Like I
Yeah.
thought that animal products were like the worst thing that I could include back in my diet. So I would say that, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying, where people can just try the carnivore diet for 30 days and see what happens. Like, be open-minded enough to do that and just see if you feel better. And if you don't, then go back to what you used to be doing.
Mhm.
So I would say that. And I would say to really, if you're vegan or vegetarian right now and it's not working for you, just try animal products again and see how your health improves.
I think that's great advice because for so many people, it can just be like I've heard a lot of people say just that the one thing that they ate that was an animal product while they were still plant based changed their lives. Like it brought them to
Mhm.
life again. Have you heard people say that? Like it just makes such a big difference.
Yes, and I think about myself too, and I wonder, am I just not like when I was vegan, I was genuinely vegan. There was no like animal product that I ate in secret. And I wonder, like, is that how people stay vegan? Like they say that they're vegan, but they have this like one thing that they eat. Like, was I doing it wrong in that sense? Because I was
Yeah.
like genuinely trying to do it. But yes, I have heard that. And I've heard, not to put things that might not be true on people, but I've heard a lot of people speculate certain people in the vegan community are still eating animal products because of things they either post or, inconsistency.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's great advice. Josie, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that your story can help other people that might still be where you were and are struggling now.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. It was nice getting to chat with you.
And thank you for watching. Be safe, be well, and I'll see you next time.